Okay, the next topic in chapter 7 of Big Java early object is Arraylist. So we have been talking about arrays so far. Now we're going to be talking about Arraylist. So when we're talking about the Arraylist, is the size can change. It can grow and shrink as needed. An Arraylist can grow and shrink as needed. It has some methods that we can use it for the common tasks. So, and that's part of the object-oriented design, that we're going to have some method. We don't have to rewrite it. Somebody has written it. We're going to be using it. So when I want, remember in arrays, when you get to your size of your array, you'll have to do something about it. But in Arraylist, when you finish up the size that you have, when you add something to it, it's going to start growing. So I don't have to worry about it. Okay. From the efficiency point of view, I want to say something here. So Arraylist, like vectors, they do some things in the background, finding the memory, adding it to it. So there are some stuff happening behind the scenes. So that doesn't give me the permission that I use Arraylist all the time and never use arrays. So if I have a fixed size and I know the size of it is not going to change, array would be better than Arraylist. Okay, so the way that we're going to do it is, so some of you coming in from C++, you might look at this and say, oh, this is a template. So this is going to be what we're going to be using the type. So the Arraylist can have different data type. So we can put it here, including objects that we learn later on, that we can put an object in here. A string is basically an object too. And then we're going to create a new Arraylist, and then we're going to put the string in. So that's the way we're going to create a new object of Arraylist. And we're going to put the address of this new object into this one, which has the same data type. Now, when we have this, remember, it doesn't contain anything, doesn't have anything in it. It's just has a size of 0. So basically, it's not pointing anymore. So we're going to use the word add to add stuff to our array list, which is called friends over here. So what add does is going to add things to the end of my array list, and it's going to grow. So as I add the stuff, it's going to go to the end of it, it's going to add in there, and the array list size is going to grow. Then we have a method called get. So if I want to access anything in my array list, I'm going to use the get. If I want to change the content of anything in my array list, I'm going to use set. So remember getters and setters in our classes that we talked about before. So we have the get and set. Okay, so we're going to use this method, just like we were doing with the array, to create an array list. We got to be sure that we have our data types over here. What data type we're going to use? Array list is part of Java util, so you have to bring it in to be able to use it. It's a generic class. And the bracket is the type parameter. And we can change the string to other data types, and it has to be an object. You cannot put int in there or double. It has to be an object. Okay, so let's go through this a little more. So if I create an array list, in this case, we called it names. Remember, this is the way we're going to create an array list with the parentheses at the end, like a default constructor. So we have that. We're going to keep adding stuff to it. So first we're going to add Emily. So the Emily is going to go in there. Then we're going to add Bob. Then Bob is going to go there. Then we're going to add Cindy. Then Cindy is going to go there. So it's keep adding it to the end. The add is just going to add whatever we have to the end of our array list. So if I go, say, get 2, 0, 1, 2, that's what's going to give me. If I go outside of my boundaries, it's going to give me an exception error. The exception is going to be out of bound error. We're going to talk more about exceptions. So this one is going to go to element 2, and it's going to change the content of element 2 to this name. I can insert something in there. So remember, if I do set, it's going to go and change that element to this. What about if I want to insert something in that position? So if I say add by itself, it's going to add it to the end. But what about if I want to add it to index 1? So if I use add without the number, it's going to put it at the end. If I put a number in there, it's going to be going to that index and it's going to insert it in there. And automatically it's going to move everything toward the end. I don't have to do anything, it's just going to insert it in there. So when you say add 1 and, it's going to go to index 1, it's going to put an in there, and it's going to push everything down. Same thing goes with the remove. If I say remove 1, it's going to remove index 1 content, and it's going to move everything back, so I don't have to do it. Just like in arrays, we have to do these kind of things manually. Here, we don't have to do it. When we are going to print, we can print array list. So when you print your array list, it's going to put it in the bracket, and it's going to separate the elements by comma. So these are very similar, Python and Java, to each other. So this is what happened. We had the names, then we did the add 1 and. So we went to index 1, we add an in there. The rest of them was pushed down. When we say remove 1, we go to index 1 and we remove it, and we're going to get the new one here. We can use our for each loop. So we can do that one to make it easier to use. This is the same as this one, old-fashioned way for those who want to use it. Copying array list. So remember, if you just say one array list equal the other one, it's just going to copy the address, just like any other object. When you use an equal sign, it's going to copy the address of one and it's going to put it on the other one. So when I come here and I say friends equal names, it's just going to copy the address of that. It's going to put it in there. Both of them are going to be pointing to the same object. That means any changes to one is going to affect the other one too. Now, we can pass array list as a parameter for the constructor of creating an array list. So remember, every time you create a new object, you have an option of having a default values or pass parameter. In this case, I am passing an array list over here. So we call it whatever we want to call it, new names. Of course, it has to be the same data type. And then I pass another array list. So it's going to copy the content of this array list into this one. So it's going to create an object. It's going to copy the stuff in there, and it's going to give me back the address that we put it in the new names. So some convenient ways of doing stuff. Okay, so the constructor, the empty one, is doesn't have nothing in the parentheses. It's going to construct it. Of course, the size is 0. it doesn't have anything in it. We can add the stop to it. Then we can print the whole array list. We can add in, or using the same add method as part of our class of the array list. So this add is basically the insert. And remove, again, it has to have the correct number for the list that we have. We can set, this is going to go to this index and change the content of that to whatever we have here. The get is going to return the content of this location. If I want to get the last one, it's going to be size -1. Remember, it's called size. Okay, so what I said is when you are creating array list is going to accept objects. And we talked about this before, that almost everything in Java is a class except few things. Primitive data types, int, double, and so on. So now we have an array list. We want to use int, but int is not a class. So what did they do? They come up with a way of changing it. So they call it the wrapper class. So these are the primitive types. That means they don't have class for these things. And the wrapper classes are going to start with capital letters. So these are going to be classes of these types. So for example, I have double, but double with capital D is a class of double. And Java knows how to go back and forth, so I don't have to worry about it. So if I want to create an array list of double, I cannot use this double, but I can use this one. So these are the ones that these are classes. Whenever we need the classes of them, we can do it. And these are the called primitive types. These are the only things that are not classes in Java. Okay, so now that we know that, we can create array list of double with the capital D. And it's going to automatically fix it. So if I have a number of type double and I want to insert it in this array list, it's going to take my number, it's going to wrap it in a class double, and it's going to put it in there. That's called auto boxing. So it's going to happen automatically. I don't have to worry about it. So in here, you see this double is type class, and then I am putting a number in it. So this number is going to create an object. It's going to put this number in it, and then it's going to have it as an object of a double. Vice versa, if I had an object of a double and I want to put it in primitive type, it's going to do it automatically. I don't have to worry about it. So this is a class, this is a primitive type. So this is a picture of the wrapper. We call it, I mean, you can call it anything you want, it's just a variable. And then it's going to create an object, and this object is going to have an instance variable of something. So we talked about the array algorithms, and now we can apply them to the array list. So a few things to note: when we were working arrays, we were using .lengths, just as an instance variable. When we're using array list, it's going to be dot size with parentheses, meaning that this is a method. We're going to call the method. When we were doing the arrays, we were using the bracket. When you're using array list, we're going to use dot get to get something. So something to get adjusted with. So we had something to read from the user and put it in the array list. In here, remember when you were doing the array, you had to be careful about the size of the array. Here, I'm not worried about it. As far as you give me any numbers, I'm going to put it in the array list. I don't have to worry about the size. It's just going to keep going. So we are looking for the matches in this case. So we are going through. So remember, if I want to modify anything, I'm not going to use for each. Because if I use for each, I cannot modify it. So I'm going to use this old-fashioned for loop. I'm going to go through everything up to size of my array list. I'm going to get a value. And if the word inside of this element, so it's going to be less than length 4, I'm going to remove it or do whatever you want to do. So I'm looking for having words more than 4 characters. So I get the word. I'm going to get it from the array. I'm going to put it in this one. I'm going to check the length of it. And if it's less than 4, then I'm going to do something about it. Okay, so the last thing here is, when do we use array list? When do we use arrays? So array list can grow and shrink. Arrays have nicer syntax. For a recommendation, if we have the size and we know it's never going to change, we're going to use the array. If we know that we have a long sequence of primitive types, we're going to be using array. Remember, every time we take the primitive type and we're going to wrap it, it's going to be some cost in our computer. So converting them, things are happening behind the scenes. So that's going to be cost. So if I have a long primitive types, we're going to put it in the array. Otherwise, we're going to be using array list. So I want you work with me on this kind of activity to see if you remember this stuff. We're comparing arrays and array list. So do you remember how to get an elements from arrays and how to get it from array list? How do we get something from arrays and how do we get it from array list? Okay, how do we replace an element in an array? So if I have an element and I want to replace it with something, I'm pretty sure you remember how to do it with arrays. We did a lot of work on this. What about the array list? Do you remember what we were using to replace it? It has the index and the method is called what? So we're going to do the set and then we're going to have an index and the value we want to set it to. How do we get the number of elements in arrays? Is dot length. In array list is dot size. Number of field elements. So remember, we had to do some work around it to get partially filled arrays. In array list, we don't have that. We just gonna get the size. How do we remove an element in arrays? Especially if it's going to be sorted, we have to go through some work to remove something. If it's not, so remember what we talked about, removing stuff from the array. If it's not sorted, we're going to take the last element, we're going to put it in the top of the one that we want to remove. We're going to change the size, current size, whatever we want to call it. But if it was sorted, we had to move everything to fill up. So that's something that we have to do. In here, we're just going to say remove, and it's going to do it for us. Same thing goes with add an element with growing collection. So if we add the stuff in an array and the array size, we're going to hit the array size. What do we need to do? First of all, when we add the stuff, we can add it to the end if the sorting or order, as your book says, is not the concern. And if you want to put it somewhere in the middle, we have to move things down. But what about if we run out of the space? So if I have the size of my array is 100, and I want to add something into this array, remember what we had to do? We had to increase the size of the array, copy the stuff of another array to this one, and possibly put it back as the variable name. So we had to do all those things to be sure we can have enough room to add stuff in the array. In here, I don't have to worry about any of those things. Arraylist is going to do it for us. How do we initialize it? We can use the braces to initialize our array, and we don't have it in Arraylist. So this is a program that we have to find the largest value. We just go through it. Remember, just like array, you would set the first one to your max. And then as you go through the array list, which is going to be looking for the size, you're just looking to see if the element that you're looking for is bigger than your max. Then you set your max to that element and you just keep going. Okay, I'm going to stop this one right here. Go and do your self-check 735 related to this section, and you can come back to this. So go ahead and do your self-check. If you have any question, post it in the class, send me a note, or we can discuss it during the class time.